Ramatet.
Good
And
morning.
good morning. We are on the last line of Daf Ramatet on the bed, and we are discussing the challenging but important discussion about a woman who is raped or seduced. So there's cases that are called ones, which means force, which is rape, or pitoy, which I'm not sure how we translate pitoy exactly, but seduction, I think often, but it doesn't necessarily mean seduction, of course, right? She could initiate. It's nothing to do with who seduced who, but it means consensual, right? So in both cases, the Torah has a discussion about what happens to her from a marriage standpoint. So that's what we focus on in that sense. Today we will mention, and I think we've discussed this before, that of course in many circumstances there's damage and there's embarrassment and there's like any other assault, right? So meaning it's a very obviously unpleasant thing, depending on the circumstance, depending on how unpleasant, right? And you pay accordingly. But this specifically, the Knas really deals with sort of the marriage part of it, which is that previously she could have been married off by her father. The father accepts the money of the Kiddushin. Now he can't, or she won't be able to. And so that's the question of what happens. And remember, the Torah says by an onus, by a case of rape, that the rapist has to marry her, to give a Knas, and he can never divorce her. Again, very challenging for us to understand from our view, right, why someone would want that, but from the view of, worrying about her marriageability, that takes that problem off the table. But Pitoy, it's not so clear. We're going to discuss today whether or not he has to marry her, what exactly happens. So before we get there, though, yesterday's Gemara is the bottom line, where Abaya made a point where it says in the Torah that you give the knas, you give the fine to the aviha na'ara. Said Abaya, if she is no longer a na'ara, she gets older, then you don't give the knas. If she dies, sorry, not if she gets older, then you don't give the knas, right? Because if she's not alive, you don't call him aviha na'ara, she's aviha meita. And so again, it's a technicality. I can't say there's a real justification, but that's based on the reading of the pasuk. And we said that question was not so clear to Rava, because Rava asked the question. I'm going to read there from 3 lines from the bottom. The boy Rava, yesh beger bekever, or ein beger bekever. Does a woman become a bogeret if she's not alive? She's in the grave. And the question was, right, again, a man rapes a woman, he has to pay a knas. If she becomes a bogeret, which is generally 6 months after she becomes a na'ara, then he pays it to her, not to her father. But if she's not alive, does he pay it to her, meaning her estate? And if she's a child, it goes to that child. Or do you pay it to the father, or nothing, right? According to Baye, you might not pay it at all, because since she's not a na'ara, right? So Rava asked the question, yesh beger bekever, in beger bekever. So yesh beger bekever udibin nahav, it would go to her son. Odilma in beger bekever udaviyahav. Or perhaps there's no beger bekever, so it doesn't matter that she became a bogeret. The knas does not transfer from him, the father, to her, and therefore the money just goes to the father. It says the Gemara, before you answer this question, right, how in the world is a woman who's a bogeret, or sorry, not a bogeret, she's a na'ara, she died when she was a na'ara, in the grave she became a bogeret, how does she become pregnant? How can she have a child? Umima abra, can you become pregnant? Now we're assuming she had to become pregnant when she was less than 12, right? If she died between the age of 12 and 12 and a half. Pregnancy usually lasts 9 months. She must become pregnant when she was 11 or 10. Is that possible? But Tani Rav Bibi Kamei Rav Nachman, we've quoted this many times already. Shalosh nashim mishamshot b'moch. There are 3 women who, when they have intercourse, they should use contraception. Moch literally means like a sponge to block semen or to sponge it up. So in those cases, now remember we discuss this every time, but I'll do it again. Rashi says they can, right? So although there's usually a prohibition on intercourse when there's, let's say, contraception, in this case it's permitted. Tosfos doesn't like that at all because he doesn't agree with that at all. But he says that this means they have to, right? They have to use a moch because it's dangerous to become pregnant, right? And one of these 3 women, Elohin, Tana, a woman who's less than 12, Me'uberet, a woman who's pregnant, and Minika, and a woman who's nursing. Why? Tana, says the Braita, or it's not Braita, but yeah, it's a Braita, Shema Titaber, Tamut. Tana, her body is not able to handle either childbirth, this is one shot, we've also discussed this, because she can't, have a child, or her body can't even handle the pregnancy. She's not strong enough. So therefore, you don't want her to become pregnant, and you use contraception. A mu'uberet, a woman who's already pregnant, shematasa ubra sandal. They were worried that a new pregnancy could kill her previous fetus, her current fetus. It'll turn into a sandal. And a minika, we're worried about a nursing woman, shematigmol benav, she becomes pregnant, I guess her milk will stop being produced. She won't be able to feed her child, and the child will die, right? They didn't really have a lot of formula back then. So therefore, they were worried about all these cases. And it says the Braita, Ezo hi kitana. What does it mean, a kitana? It means a woman, a girl who's 11 to 12, right? So from the ages of 11 to 12, if she's sleeping with someone, she has to use or could use protection, contraception. But pachot mikan, if she's less than 11, or yeter alkein, or she's more than 12, then mishameshet kedarka v'holechet, she can do, whatever she's regular, because either before 11 she won't become pregnant, or after 12 she's strong enough to carry a pregnancy. Divrei Rabbi Meir, and that was the opinion of Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim omrim, you don't have to worry about it. No need for contraception. She can just have regular intercourse and live her life. And God will protect. So certainly, there are some young people who've been pregnant. It was very challenging, but it's life. You can trust that Hashem will protect her. Mishum shenemar shomer p'ta'im Hashem. God protects those who are fools, right? Those who don't know better. So as long as you sort of act maybe not knowing about it, you live your life, you do what everyone else is doing, even though it's a dangerous thing, we don't stop you from doing it. Right? This, of course, is the very famous discussion about, what's considered pita'im. If you know that it's dangerous, then maybe you can't do it, right? And this came into the whole discussion about behaviors that were not known to be dangerous that are now known to be dangerous, like smoking cigarettes, right? This kind of question. So anyways, not our sugya. But the point here is that you see from here that the question is, what do you see from here? So at least it seems like that you see from here that it's difficult to become pregnant when a woman is less than 12. It's dangerous, right? Not that it's impossible, but that it's dangerous. Now, if it's not impossible, why would we ask the question? Maybe it was a rare case. The Gemara does rare cases all the time, right? It's our favorite thing. So you might say, well, it's because you don't want to set up a case, right, where it has to happen this way in order a situation that we wouldn't recommend, right? Because we certainly wouldn't recommend that she tried to become pregnant when she's in her 11th year, or between 11 and 12, I guess that's her 12th year, right? So how do you explain that? Says Gemara, well, maybe the case says, maybe she became a na'ara, let's say again 12 with simanim, and she became pregnant right away. And she then still had the child, olida kashi na'ara. Maybe she gave birth while she was still a na'ara, and then she died, maybe in childbirth, right? And then she became a bogeret in the grave. And that's the case. Says the Gemara, but that can't happen. Because Bashita Yarach and Nika Yelda, can you give birth in only a 6-month span from conception? And Amar Shmuel said, Ein bein na'arut lebagrut el shisha chadashim. The period between a woman being a na'ara, which is the first stage in maturity, and a bogeret is only 6 months. And so since we don't believe that a baby can be born within 6 months of conception, remember we talked about 7 months babies and 9-month babies, but no 6-month babies. Therefore, it's impossible for a woman to conceive when she's already a na'ara and give birth while she's still a na'ara. Says, well, how do you know that's what Shmuel meant? When Shmuel said there's no ein bein na'arut lebagrut shisha chadashim, maybe he meant there's not less than 6 months. There's a minimum of 6 months. Maybe some women mature differently and they can be a na'ara for 12 months, right? Hatveika, maybe you can be longer than 6 months. It can't be. Because Ella, it doesn't say ein bein na'arut lebagrut shisha chadashim. It says Ella, only shisha chadashim. So there's never more than 6 months between being a nara and being a bogeret. Ella, this is the question. The question was not, can her child inherit her? It's impossible in normal circumstances for a woman who dies as a nara to have a child, to discuss the question of knas. The question here is yesh beger bekever upaka av, odilma ein beger bekever lo paka av. The question is, does the father get it, right? Normally, a woman who's a na'ara, who's raped, the knas goes to the father. Let's say she dies, and then she turns 12 and a half, or she would have turned 12 and a half in the grave. Then does the knas still go to the father like it would have when she was a na'ara? Or had she been alive as a bogeret, it would go to her. No, she can't go to her because she's not there. So this is the question of Abaya. Do you read the verse as saying aviha na'ara and not aviha mita, right? So if she's dead, there's no knas. Or do you continue and assume that since when she died, basically, she was a na'ara, you pay the knas to the father. So that is the question. And Amar, sorry, what's the next verse? Lo paka'av. Mar Baravashi boile hachi. Mar Baravashi asked the same question with a different wording. Mita usab bagut onesa bagut. A woman who's not alive, does she become a bogeret or not? Meaning, does her father fall out of the picture and therefore there's no knas? Or does the father not fall out of the picture? And the answer to this was teku. So we did not have a conclusive answer to this question, which of course Abaya yesterday said, I have no doubt. If the father is not her father, because she's dead, there's no knas. But these Amoraim did not have such clarity about how to resolve this issue. Now, Rava asked Abaya a whole different question. What if a man sleeps with rapes a woman, right? So he's supposed to pay a knas, but then she goes and she gets engaged to somebody else. So the question is, does she somehow lose the status? Now, why she would do it, it's not clear, but we'll see in the Gemara in a second. What happens to her knas, right? The Torah says, if you recall, we read it yesterday very carefully, that a man who sleeps with a woman who's a na'ara, bitula, asher lo orasa. She's not engaged, right? Let's say he does that, he rapes her, and then she gets engaged to somebody else. Does that change her status, right? Mahu. So he said back to him, that's a stupid question. Sorry. That doesn't say you give it to the father of a woman who is not arusa. It says if you rape a woman who's not arusa, right? The time that you slept with her, you raped her, this man raped her, she was lo arusa. So the fact that she got engaged later doesn't change the knas. Like, what's the question? So he said back to him, Abai said back to him, well, 1 second, right? Why? I'm sorry, Rava said back to him. What about the following Braita? The Braita says, Ba'alev and misait, then la'atzma. If a man raped a woman.
Wouldn't we have the same question about Nara?
No, because it says Aviha Nara. It says Natan la'aviha Nara.
Oh, when you give the payment, she has to be a Nara. Okay.
Right. So it doesn't say, that's our question. It doesn't say Natan la'avi Nara asher lo arusa. Right. It doesn't repeat that part. So said
she's not a betula anymore.
Well, she can't be, obviously. You raped her, right? But yes. Says the word tamech. Now, Rava said back to Abaya, what about the following Braita? The following Braita doesn't make me sound like such an idiot. Because this Braita says, let's say he rapes her, and then she goes ahead and gets married, right? So instead of Erusin, she does Nisuin. Then the Braita says, La'atzma, it goes to her. Why does it go to her? Doesn't say in the Torah, give it to the father if she's not married. So there, we obviously change the status for whatever reason. So my only question is, does that extend to engagement, right? To Erusin? Why are you making me sound like I don't know what I'm talking about, right? That was Rava's retort. Baya said, no, I still think you're a fool, or not a fool, but that you're totally wrong. Because hachihash, listen, think of it that way. There, hatam, by marriage, ho'il bagut motzimir shutav, right? Torah says, you give the avia nara. If she grows up to be a bogeret, she gets the knas herself. Why? Because a woman is considered to be in her father's control or reshut as long as she's a na'ara. Once she's older, and not very old, 12 and a half or whatever, then she leaves her father's reshut and everything goes to her. She's independent, right? So nisu'in motzin mirshudav, that is comparable to marriage. Once a woman gets married, she's no longer in the reshut of her father. She might be in the reshut of her husband, but she's no longer in the reshut of her father. And therefore it goes to her, not to her father. But, right, so ma nisu'in motzin mirshudav, ma bagrut, ba'aleu bagra, just like we know that if a person takes advantage of her, rapes her, and then she becomes a bogeret, it goes la'atzma, the knas goes to her. So too, af nisu'in ba'alev niseit la'atzma. Once she has changed her status to be a married woman, she's not under her father's reshut anymore. Ella Erison, getting engaged, Mika Mapkim Yershuta the Avla Gamri. A woman who gets Erison is not out of her father's rishut. Totally. She's partially out because she's married, just to be clear. She's an Eshet, right? But she's not totally out of her father's rishut because, as of course the famous Mishnah, Atznan, Na'araha Ma'urasa, a young woman who is also married, also engaged, Avia Ubala Mefirin La Nidara, right? Both her father and her husband have to annul or have the power to annul her neder, which is the way the Torah describes reshut, right? So the woman up till the age of marriage, essentially, her father has control over her nidarim. Once she's married, Nisuin, it's her husband. If she's a na'ara, urasa, she's in the middle ground. And her father has reshut and her husband, and we'll discuss in Nidarim, of course, how the mechanism works. But that is why, says Rava to Abaya, your question makes no sense. You don't change her status just because she gets erison. You could excuse, sorry, that's what Abaya said to Rava. You can excuse Rava for, making the claim that obviously erison is more than just nothing. But that's the discussion. Okay, next Mishnah. Sorry, says the Mishnah, there's a big difference or a small difference between a woman, again, these are all referring to cases where she is young, right? And she's essentially in her father's rishut. She's above 12, she's a na'ara, let's assume, we're going to get some details. And she sleeps with a man, right? So there's two cases in the Torah, of course. In Mishpatim, we talk about pitui, where she does it willingly, even though some people had problems with the issue of consent in that situation, right? But the Torah calls it willingly. Then the Torah says you give to the father money if he doesn't marry her. We'll see the cases, right? He has to marry her. If he doesn't marry her, you give the money to the father, a knas. If in the Dvarim, in Kiteitzei, we talk about the case where he raped her, right? And there it says you give a knas and lo tiyeh leisha. He has to marry, right? So says our Mishnah, Hamifateh, a man who seduces a woman and sleeps with her, notain shlosha dvarim. He has to pay 3 categories of damages. We'll see what they are. The ones arba'a, and if you rape a woman, you have to give 4 categories. What are they? Hamifateh, you pay notain boshet, you pay embarrassment, right? Again, we'll discuss some of this, but embarrassment that it's again not embarrassment because it's a shameful thing for the family, and you pay it to the father, by the way, right? So you pay boshet because it's embarrassing that this woman slept with someone before marriage. Upigam, you pay the difference in pigam. Now we'll see again. Pigam probably means the difference in what her worth would be, what her value would be, and you pay the knas. Right? The Torah speaks about a fine that you pay for sleeping with a woman who's not a minor but a na'ara. Now, that's for a mefateh. That's where it's willingly. Mosif alav ones shenotina tatzar. In a case of rape, you also pay for pain, for tzar. Okay? Now, it says the Mishnah, ma bein ones and mefateh. What's the difference between ones and mefateh? Seems a little redundant. Because ones notina tatzar, which we just quoted, right? In case of rape, in addition to the other payments, you pay for pain. And mefateh eno notina tatzar. In the case of seduction, you don't pay tsar. And furthermore, we're getting a list now. Ones noten miyad, right? A ones you pay right away, meaning the second you commit the act, you're chayav to pay. Fateh, you only pay when you divorce her. Now we're going to see what does that mean, kishiyotzi, but obviously we're going to understand it means if you don't marry her, right? Because the Torah says by mefateh that the knas depends on marriage. If you marry her, you don't pay a knas. If you choose not to marry her, or she choose whatever, we'll discuss it, then you do pay a knas. So it depends on marriage status. And ones shoteh ba'atzitzo. Now, ones has to drink in their cup, meaning, it's a little crude way of saying, that he has to stay married to her forever, right? A person who rapes a woman has no option, no alternative. And we're going to see, Gemara says, no matter what she could have any kind of physical ailment or something that's unpleasant, it doesn't matter. He has no way out of it. He has to marry her potentially, but he can divorce her if he wants to divorce her. And again, we're going to see the cases. And what does it mean? He has to drink, whatever in his cup. Even if she's lame and he wouldn't have otherwise wanted to be married to her. I feel he's suma, even if she's blind. I feel he mukashchin, even if she has got some kind of, skin deformity. He has to stay married to her or marry her. Nimsa badvar erva, but if he finds that she is over on a rayot, she sleeps with someone else, she's over an isser of a prohibited erva, or she's not allowed to be married, she's a mamzeret, then he's not allowed to keep her. Shenemar velo tiel isha. Torah says she has to be his for a wife. The word wife seems to be redundant because it could say lo tiyeh, right? So the isha is telling you isha haru'uyala. Has to be a woman who he could stay married to. And so if she doesn't fit that category, either because she did something wrong or because she was born with the wrong thing, then he does not have to stay married. Now, ask the Gemara a question, which I really don't have a lot of words for understanding this Gemara, say it that way. Tsar demai. Now, when you say that there's pain, what are you talking about for pain? So I don't really understand. Tosas has some. I don't really understand Tosas either, to be very honest with you. But the Gemara's question is, what pain are you referring to when you're referring to intercourse, and meaning specifically, what's pain that would specifically apply in a case of rape that wouldn't apply in a case of non-rape, of mifuta, right?
Does the Torah recognize emotional or psychological pain, or this is only physical pain?
It's only physical pain. But I would say emotional, psychological pain might fall under Bosha in some context. But it's very hard to know. I mean, the Torah obviously had a whole different take on what was going on here than we would think, as you can tell. So it says the Gemara, what is the tsar, right? So anyways, it's very complicated. So because Tosas is very bothered. Just like, what are you talking about? First of all, we always talk about pain of breaking a woman's virginity, right? We talk about that pain. Second of all, Tosas says there are many young women, just sadly, it sounds like in Tosas' time that's what happened, who get married, who suffer terribly from sleeping with their husbands, right? So, again, I think we've had elsewhere where Tosas talks about where they married them off very young in Germany, and I mean, they had very small communities, I guess, and anyways, it was not ideal situation. So Tosas, he talks in some detail about how there's different kinds of pain, and some pain that these young women feel is really pain from healing from afterwards. I mean, it's not pain at the moment, it's a pain that comes afterwards. I'm not really sure what he means because I don't really understand that. And that we're talking about what SARS in the exact moment, not part of the healing or part of the infection, or anyways, it's not clear to me what the Gemara means exactly, but that's the question. What pain are we referring to at the act of intercourse? So said Amar Avua Dishmol, it doesn't refer to pain during intercourse. It refers to pain, Tsar Shechafta al Gabi Karka. Pain that he was rough with her, threw her on the ground, or threw her down before committing this act. And that's painful. So he which I think is certainly something we can understand, right? Any act of rape, right, involves some other, again, not in the act of intercourse, but before he threw her on the ground. So that's the pain we're referring to. Makif la Rav Zera, says Rav Zera, well, it's true that's often the case.
You're frozen. We can't hear you anymore.
Oh, we lost Ali. Cliffhanger. All right, Miriam, take over.
Right.
Lost his video too now.
Oh no, he must have realized what happened and just went out to come back, I hope. He's not even, I think he lost his Wi-Fi. He can't even get.
What's that?
Yeah. Let's see if we can get text. These were horrible times for women, I have to tell you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, I got kicked off.
I mean, it was like a crucial moment, and you left us hanging like this.
Maybe it was the subject matter. Maybe you got censored or
Must have
something.
been.
I don't know. Looks like my internet's not working. Anyways, I'm using my phone, so hopefully it'll work better.
Tell Nava to turn off Netflix.
Exactly. I don't think anyone else. That's the thing. No, who's using it at 8 a.m. But either way, says the Gemara. The bottom line: Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda said, "Mishum Rabbi Shimon, ones eno mishalim et hatzar," which is unlike our Mishnah, right? Our Mishnah says that a person who rapes a woman pays for the pain. Says Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar ben Yehuda. Sorry.
Go back to Rabbi Zera. That's where you dropped.
Oh, sorry. Matkif Rabbi Zera. So ask Rabbi Zera if you're saying that the pain that we're referring to is pain involved in the attack, right? Throwing her on the ground before the rape. So that's not a necessary thing. It doesn't always happen that way. Meaning, let's say he threw her onto silk shirayim, usually means very soft mattresses, right? So you'd be patur in that case. It's dependent on, the cruelty with which he did it, which it could be. It says, well, maybe it is. Maybe if he raped her in a way that didn't cause other, injuries, meaning he didn't throw her on the ground and otherwise hurt her, then you'd pay differently. So it says, but how could that be? But Tanya, now there's a braita, again, a very strange braita, where Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says, in the name of Rabbi Shimon, ones eno mishalim et hatzar, that he says disagrees with our Mishnah, and says in a case of rape, you never pay for the pain you caused. Why? Because when you marry a person, you get the same pain. So whatever pain we're referring to, if a person's married, it happens legally, right? In a rape, it happens illegally. But since one of the consequences of rape in the Torah is you have to marry her, essentially, it would have happened anyways had they been married, says Rabbi Shimon. Again, I'm just reading the Gemara. But the point is that clearly it's not then referring to throwing her around and hurting her in the way, because obviously, hopefully, right, in a marriage that doesn't happen, right? So it has to be referring to something that happens in every marriage. And Rabbi Shimon is saying, well, you don't pay for it because since you're going to be her husband, you treat it as if a husband, which you wouldn't necessarily pay. Clearly, it's not referring to pushing her down on the ground, which is not something you would expect in a marriage. So what's it referring to? So he said back to him, Amrlo, well, it's not the truth, because Eino Domeh Nivelet Ba'ones Nivelet Baratzon, right? That's not really a good question, because look, there's people, if you have bi'ah willingly, then some of the, I guess the interaction is willing, not some of it, it's willing, right? So it's not as violent, it's not as rough, you're not going to be hurt. And so throwing a person down when you're forcing them, obviously is going to harm them in a different way than sleeping with them when it's consensual. So that's what he explained as a difference. One answer. Ella Amar, that's the answer in the Bright. Ella Amar of Nachman Amar Rabbi Baravua, what we're referring to in our Mishnah is tsar shel pisuk haraglayim. The tsar is the tsar, again, I don't exactly know how to translate this either. Pisuk, I think, means spreading her legs, but it's a tsar of forcing her.
Separation.
What does it say, sir?
Separation of her legs.
Yeah, so pisuk means this hafsik, right? Separate something. But there's tsar involved in intercourse where you have to move her legs, and so that causes discomfort. And now, question of why is it different in rape or not, we'll see in a second. In fact, it's based on a pasuk, which is in the pasuk in Yechezkel, when the Navi is criticizing Bnei Yisrael for being promiscuous from a religious standpoint, right? They're promiscuous for gods. It refers to them as tifsikiyat raglech b'chol over. They spread their legs for every passerby, which is very crude critique of Bnei Yisrael adopting every other culture, every other god. So that's what it's referring to. Again, why they can't deal with the act of intercourse? It's not so clear, but it's referring to it hurts her in the act of sleeping with her because of pushing against her thighs or her legs. Says the Gemara, Yachi b'futen nami. if that's true, then why is it different whether it's consensual or non-consensual? If there's pain involved in this act automatically, right? Again, there's nothing about what's about the rape that makes it different, right? Why would she say anything about mefuteh? Says, I think we should read the answer because the question, I agree with you, is not so clear. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rabba bar Avua. Well, it's because pain has a lot to do with what a person wants to put into it, right? What a person's desire is. So says Rabba bar Avua, Mashal de mefuteh lema davar domeh. How would we imagine the case of a mefuteh? La'adam shomer lechavero, a person says to their friend, Kara shirayim shali v'hipater, right? So a person goes to someone else and says, I'm asking you to punch me in the arm or tear my shirt, and I'm not going to make you pay. Meaning it is painful for her, right? But she wants to do it. So because she wants to do it, she's basically forgiving him from tsar, from the payment, because she's consenting to the act. So again, assuming it's completely consensual, which is what we're assuming, right? It is painful for her in this act of pisuk raglayim, of spreading her legs. Again, exactly what I don't know. But it doesn't matter, and you don't pay for it because she's basically going up to him and saying to the person, I want you to do this. And so therefore he's patur from any punishment for it, from any tzar. Okay. Says the Gemara, well, how could that be though? It's not her own money. Shali, da'avuaninu. All these things go to her father. So it's not a good comparison. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to say that the payment would have gone to her father and she's allowed to say, you can do it, get rid of it, right? So how can you explain it that way? Where are we? Davuninu. Elamar of Nachman, Amar Rava bar Avua. Well, this is in fact how I would explain it. Pikachot shebehen omrot, the smart people, right? The ones who are, I guess, the doctors and the women, who know about physical intimacy and pain, they would say mefuteh ein latzar, that a woman who's mefuteh doesn't have any pain. That when she is consensual and she wants to engage in the act, it's not a painful act. So that there, in fact, is a fundamental difference between the act of intercourse when it's done by force and when it's done by consent. Ask the Gemara, it's not true, right? There are many women who have intercourse willingly, desire, but they're painful. It hurts them when they're in the act. So how could you say that just because she wants to do it, there's no pain? Amar Abaya said, Abaya, well, let me rephrase that. Amri Li'ain, my mother, remember, Abaya always quotes his mother, which we said is not really his mother, but she gave him all his life skills, right? She taught him everything. So she said, Kimaya chamima aresha dekarcha. It's like boiling hot water on a cold head. So that's a very challenging Gemara, right? Meaning that it is painful. It's very uncomfortable when it happens, but it's very satisfying afterwards. And so though there's pain in the act, if it's pitoy, if it's desired, then it's sort of you wouldn't think of that as being damaging. You think of that as part of the pain for the joy that you get from the hot shower. So the same thing would be true over here. Rava says, I have another parable. I'm really Bat Rav Chisda. I heard from Bat Rav Chisda, who I think was Rava's wife. Yeah. So just so you know, he wasn't talking about Bat Rav Chisda about pain of intercourse, right? So it's his wife. He rivda de kusilta. It's like when they draw blood from you, right? So they stick a needle in, which again they thought was very beneficial. It's painful when it goes in, but you're going to benefit from it afterwards because they felt better after they drew their blood. Or if Papa said, Amri be bat Abba Surah, I heard from bat Abba Surah, Kinama akushya b'chinachi. Again, cases are very sexual, right? Like nahama, which means bread, that's hard in your throat. Right? You eat a very hard piece of bread, a hard baguette. It's painful when it goes down because it sort of scratches, but it's incredibly satisfying afterwards. And so you basically, I just read the Gemara, but that all of these are examples where there is pain, there is discomfort, but if it's done willingly, then it's sort of done as part of the act of what you're enjoying, and therefore you don't think of it as tzar, and there's no payment for that tzar. But if it's done unwillingly, if it's rape, then it's just pain. And so the act itself is painful. Again, it's not clear to me if at the end of the Gemara is admitting that the act of intercourse itself is painful, right? But it can be painful and be enjoyable if it's willingly, or if we're still talking about these prelude to intercourse, which is when we talk about spreading her legs, pushing. Either way, the Gemara is satisfied that there is pain when it's rape and there's not pain when it's consensual. Continue the Mishnah. ha'ones noten miyad. We said that a woman who's raped, you pay the knas right away, but mifateh l'kishiyotzi. It's seduction, you only pay when you get rid of her, when she leaves the marriage. It says, well, what do you mean l'kishiyotzi when she leaves? She's not leaving. Ishtohi, right? She's a person's, you're supposed to marry her. It means ema l'kishelo yichnos. It means if you don't marry her, right? Meaning you have the option to marry her. If you do marry her, you don't pay a knas if it's mifuteh, right? Because so if she wanted to do it, you marry her. If you don't marry her, then you have to pay a knas because now presumably she can't get married. She's certainly not a betula anymore, and so her father loses that money. So you have to pay the knas to compensate her to repay the father. Tanya nami hachi. In fact, the Braita says this clearly. Afa pisha amru. Even though the Mishnah just said hamifateh noten l'kishelo yichnos, that you pay a mifateh the knas, you pay the father the knas if you don't marry her. Boshet upigam noten miyad. You have to pay the boshet and pigam immediately. Ve'echad ha'ones ve'echad mifateh. Now, whether a woman has been raped or a woman is mifateh, she's been seduced and she does it willingly. Bein avia icholin la'akev. You cannot force her to marry the attacker. So either she or her father can say, I don't want this marriage to happen. It says the Gemara.
Wait, didn't you say though that he has to marry her?
That's from his side. If she says, I don't want to do it, then we don't force her.
Okay.
And the difference is that, well, we're going to discuss it, but if it's pitui, if it's seduction, she says, I don't want to marry him, then he doesn't pay a knas. If it's ones, even if she says I don't want to marry him, he still has to pay a knas.
Yeah.
But says the Bright that either she or her father, but she may want, she's mefuteh, right? She slept with him willingly in that case. She wants to marry him, right? Maybe her father didn't let her marry him.
Exactly. I was thinking that. Yeah.
Right. So the father can also stop her. Now, just to be clear, once she turns 12 and a half, the father can't stop her, right? So this is just for a period of time, right? The father doesn't control her forever. He controls her for this period of na'arut. Now, on the other hand, the father can accept kedushin for her from somebody else, right? So he can accept from anyone, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Which was a very sad, I think, detail of their lives. But anyways, the Mishnah, the Braita says that bein avia yicholin la'akev. Now, bishlama mifuteh. Now, I understand where the source for this in the case of mifuteh, because the Torah says im ma'ain yima'ain avia. Torah specifically speaks out. If the father doesn't want her to get married, then she doesn't have to get married. And the Braita adds, Ein li ala avia. I only know if the father says, I don't like the shit. What about hi atzma minayin? What if she says, I don't want to marry this guy, right? She slept with him willingly, but I don't want to stay married to him. Then how do you know she can say that? Talmud lomar yim ma'in, right? It doubles the language. Im ma'in yim ma'in. If he refuses, or the father refuses, but why does it double it? To tell you, including her. Mikol makom. Ela onis. Now, what about the case of rape? So bishlema ihi. I understand that she can say, I don't want to marry the rapist, because Ketubot says, lo tiyeh liisha. He has to be her wife, but that implies she has to have agency. Midata. Ela avia minala. How do you know that the father can stop the marriage? So that if a man rapes a young woman, and the woman doesn't say whether she wants to marry him or not, she's happy to marry him for whatever reason, right?
I got to go. See you guys later.
Okay, thanks. But the father says, I don't want this to happen. How do you know that he can stop it? Amar Abaye, the first wide line, Shelo yehei chotei niskar. Exactly what you were thinking, Miriam. We don't want a sinner to benefit, right? Let's say, for whatever reason, this girl's very young. She's easily, convinced or whatever. But the man said, I wanted to marry her. The father said no. He goes and rapes her, and essentially now he can marry her. So it says the father still has to have his agency. Again, as long as she's that age, she's 12 to 12 and a half. That's the father can't be forced to marry off his daughter.
So it's really only during those 6 months?
Yeah. Because once she's older, what's it? It's the father in those 6 months. No. When she's beyond that, he might still have to marry her or pay her.
I'm asking for before.
I mean, before she's 12.
Before she's 12, yeah. What would happen?
So before she's 12, then he would, so some of the halachot still apply. Before she's 12, the father essentially still has control. He'd still have to marry. The rape part is married, correct. But I don't think she could refuse before I'm not sure.
That's the difference. Okay.
She can refuse before she's told. I don't think so, but I'm not sure if we'll discuss it. Pay attention. We'll see. But certainly when she's 12, she can. Rava says, well, it's a kal v'chomer. Not, it's the reason we know the father can do it is from a kal v'chomer, because ma mefuteh, right? In the case where he seduced her, it was willing. Shelo avar el adat avia bovat, right? The man slept with her. She was willing. The father didn't want this to happen because otherwise they would have got married, right? So the rape, the seducer, let's say, only was over on the dat avia. But in that case, we just prove from a pasuk, either she or her father can say, we don't want this marriage to go forward. So in the case of ones, of rape, she'avar both al dat avia and al dat atzma, he has violated both her father's desire and her desire. So lo kol shekain that they should both be able to stop the wedding. Now Rava lo amar kabaya. Why didn't Rava say like Abaya? Abaya said, well, we give the father agency because how in the world, otherwise you're basically allowing the person to, circumvent the father's desire by sinning, by raping a woman. He gets to marry her, even though the father doesn't want to do it. Says, well, that's not really a benefit necessarily, because given the Kamishal and Knas, he has to pay the Knas, so it's not like he's getting off without the regular requirement of marriage. He still has to pay, essentially. No. So it's not completely a benefit. And Abaya lo amar Rava, because Abaya says like Rava, unlike Rava, that there's no kal v'chomer, because mifate, in the case of seduction, di'ihu matzim akev, since the husband himself, not the seducer, could say, I don't want to do it, right? Remember, if he says, I don't want to marry her, he just pays the knas, right? He has a choice in pitur. So there, the husband, or not the husband, the man who slept with her, has that ability. Avianami matzim akev, the father might have that ability. But ones, in the case of rape, the husband, the rapist, has no choice. The ihu lo matzim akev, he certainly cannot stop from marrying her. Maybe the father can't either. And it's really, we let her decide because, it wouldn't be fair to her otherwise, but we don't let anyone else have agency. Tanya idach, in fact, there's another brighter which speaks it out. Even though by rape we say that you pay the fine and you pay the tsar and everything right away, when they get divorced, then he doesn't have to pay anything. Says, what? Divorce? How could he divorce her? Torah says, Lo tiyeh isha, right? Lo yuchal l'shalcha. It says straight out in the pasuk. You cannot divorce her. Says, well, no, he can't divorce her, but she can say, I want a divorce, right? If the woman was raped, says, I don't want to be married to you anymore. He doesn't have to give her anything because he basically already paid her ketubah. Right, by paying the knas, he paid to the father what would have been the ketubah. Now, what if he's mate? What if he dies, the husband? Right. So usually when a husband dies, right, the ketubah goes to his wife. But here, yatsa kesef knasa ketubah. There's no ketubah because he basically already paid it during her lifetime. He paid it to her father, but he paid the knas. Rabbi Yehuda says no, it's not true. She has a ketubah, but it's a ketubah of a mana. It's a ketubah of a woman who's already been, not a virgin. Not a betulah, because that's in fact, again, he paid already that part of the ketubah that was for the betulah, and this is the extra. Now, but my committee, what's the basis for that argument? Rabbanan Sabri, look, there's no reason to make a ketubah in the case of a woman who's married to a person who raped her. Because time of my takin Rabbanan ketubah, what's the rationale for making a gzera of ketubah that if a man dies or divorces his wife, he has to pay her? We don't want it to be easy for him in his eyes to divorce her. We don't want, we discussed this many times. We're going to keep discussing it in this Masechet Ketubot, that we don't want it to be trivial, that he gets angry, he sees someone else, whatever, and he says, okay, I'm divorcing you. We want there to be a burden to do it. But here, obviously, the Torah says you can never divorce her your whole life. So therefore, there's no power. Here, he can never divorce her. And so therefore, there's no need to make a ketubah. So that's why we don't do it. Rabbi Yehuda says that you make it sound like a man who can't divorce a woman can't make her life miserable. Hanami mitzaerla, he can make her life full of tsar. Ad amra he lo be'inalach, until she says, I don't want to stay married to you, right? So he certainly, it's true he can't initiate the divorce, but he can be very unpleasant. And if you don't make him have any payment for that, it'll lead to a very unpleasant marriage. And so therefore,
It
sounds like
didn't start well to begin with.
I agree. It did not start off in the best way. But again, these are very, very hard to get my heart to psukim to understand, right? But the psukim seem to imply that it's not. Yeah. Anyways, I don't know. I don't even know how to say it. But here, that's what Rabbi Yosef Yehuda says, and therefore there still is a ketubah. Let me read 2 more lines just to get to the top. If that's okay. So the Mishnah said, that a man who rapes a woman has to stay married to her no matter what, even if she's, mukeshchin, even if she's got some wounds. But if it's seduction, he doesn't have to. Amalei Rava Parzakia, the Ravashi Rava from Parzakia, said to Ravashi, why? How do you know they're different? Michli, Migmar Gamir Miadadi, right? We've learned many, many rules of onus from Pitor, right? We keep comparing them. Remember, we compared Kesef to Shkalim, right? We had all these different comparisons. How do you know that we shouldn't compare them for this detail as well? So the Torah very clearly says by what's it called? By onus, that he has to stay married to her. So maybe you should say the same thing by mifateh, and he can never divorce her. Says the Gemara. Well, on Markra, the pasuk says, "Mohar Gimharenu lo liisha." She is paid or given her the value for her as a liisha, and lo, the word lo implies nida'ato, that there is some agency for the man in this case of onus. Oh, sorry, of pitur, not of onus. In onus, the man has no choice; he has to marry her and stay married to her. But in a case of seduction, he gets a choice, and he has to marry her if she wants to get married, but he can then divorce her and pay ksuba in the future. And that's what we learned from this pasuk. I think we should stop here. We'll do tomorrow.
Not a great thing to be a woman back then.
Yeah. I mean, look, the Gemara is, I would say the Gemara is not very pleasant, but it's really the psukim, right? It's not, this is not just the Torah very clearly, thinks of this as the father and the rapist. The woman has very, very little agency in this whole story, and it's very challenging, I admit.
It is.
Okay, well, on that note, Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. Thank you.
Okay, have a good week.